Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Seducing Mr. Right by Katee Robert. Narrated by Kasha, Kensington. Chapter 1. You really won't reconsider? Nope. Danielle Kastien adjusted the lace mask covering her eyes. Besides, he invited me to the party. It would be rude not to show up, especially since she had every intention of seducing the male guy she'd been chatting up in her building's coffee shop for the last few months at said party. He'd spent every Tuesday and Thursday drinking her in with those warm brown eyes, the same way he drank his coffee, slow and controlled, as if it were the most delicious thing in the world. If he could appreciate something as disgusting as coffee, it made her wonder what it would be like to have him focus that appreciation on her. Yes, spending time with Grayson had the nasty habit of making her think all sorts of wicked thoughts. Considering that she'd somehow managed not to give in to the sexual tension between them before now, she was already petitioning for saint status. That ended tonight. Chelsea perched on the edge of the vanity and handed over the brilliant red lipstick Danielle favored. As a kid, Danielle had hated the fact that she was so short and built delicately. It meant she couldn't keep up on the rare occasions her father actually spent time with her. But now she liked to play up her China doll looks. "I know you were invited," Chelsea said, fidgeting a little. "But are you sure you're not reacting to that blowout you had with your father yesterday?" She flinched. Her dad, a decorated 4-star general, didn't like what she was doing with her life, and he never had. He didn't approve of her corporate job or the fact that she was 26 and still mucking about with various men instead of settling down with a good provider. He'd actually used that term, a good provider. As if they were still living in the 50s and her place was to be pregnant, barefoot, and in the kitchen. He'd be thrilled if she ended up with someone like him, some man in a powerful job who'd steamroll her until she fit the perfect little mold he thought she should. Danielle had never been all that good at coloring inside the lines. "The one where he informed me all my life decisions to date are pathetic and worthless and I'll never amount to anything?" She finished with her lipstick and rolled her lips together. "Would that be the conversation you're talking about?" Chelsea gave her a look filled with concern. Yes." She made an effort to keep her carefree smile in place, despite the fact that she felt like breaking something. If she was immature enough to be throwing tantrums, she was playing right into his beliefs that she was failing at life. Just because she didn't have a soft and feminine job. What the hell did Dad even know about soft and feminine? Any appreciation he'd had of those things died along with her mother 20 years ago. She might not have the most glorious of jobs, but she was putting herself through night school so she'd have the qualifications to be eligible for promotion. Not that she'd told her dad about night school, or anyone else, except for Grayson. He'd thought it was great that she was bettering herself. Hell, he'd even seemed to understand her reasoning for not sharing that fact with anyone else in her life. He also understood why she liked working in an office, pushing paper. She was pretty good with numbers and liked how they were confined to a very specific logic. But there was no use thinking about it now, especially when fights with her dad usually left her feeling reckless, which led to all sorts of stupid decisions. "I've had my eye on this guy for a while. My jumping him has nothing to do with my daddy issues. Are you sure you don't want to come with Nathan and me tonight?" From her best friend's tone, she knew the offer was a lost cause. Danielle's smile was a bit more real this time. "Nah, you guys are great and all, but I'm not really into the whole third wheel thing. Or seventh wheel, since you have all those other couples with you." Chelsea had recently made the decision to move in with the love of her life. This weekend was her last here before the movers showed up for the big pieces of furniture, and she finally settled into the gorgeous condo in the same neighborhood as the gallery she now shared with her husband. "Are you sure? The bar we're going to is filled with gorgeous single men who don't work in your building." Chelsea stood and smoothed down her Lucille ball dress. With her red hair done up in the familiar style, she looked like both a blast from the past and a chic present-day model. The woman was made to wear that style. I'm sure. She frowned. What happens after tonight? I don't suppose you're going to date this one. Date? Danielle paused and let herself actually consider it. She and Grayson had shared coffee twice a week for the last few months. It had started when he caught her checking out his ass in the elevator, and they just kept running into each other. She'd never admit it, but she caught herself lingering in the lobby longer than was strictly necessary just to see if he'd show up and give her that look. The one that made her knees turn to jello. He always did. And then there were the conversations they had. What started out as a stolen 15 minutes to down her energy drink while he had coffee sometimes turned into a full hour. A few times they'd even talked longer. When she sat across the table from Grayson, time seemed to stand still. He made her laugh, and he made her hot, and she found herself telling him things he had no business knowing, like her frustrations with her father and her tentative plans for the future. He'd even gone so far as to give her a few different options to look into beyond the one she'd been considering. But dating was something else altogether. Dating meant bringing him home to Dad and trying to build a relationship, which she'd never been all that good at doing. Relationships meant putting herself in someone else's power, which was something she'd gone out of her way to avoid ever since she moved out. She liked not having to answer to anyone. Danielle? What was the question again? Oh, right, dating. She plumped her boobs and then checked the effect in the mirror. Don't be ridiculous. You know me, I don't date. Not yet. Chelsea laughed at the look on her face. You never know what could happen if you meet the right guy. Now you're starting to sound like Dad. Danielle stood up and turned a quick circle. What do you think? You look amazing and you know it. Chelsea smiled. Catwoman was a stroke of genius. Danielle wasn't going to deny it. The whole black cat suit and killer heels thing made her feel like a vixen. Grayson wouldn't know what hit him. I'd do my best. She made a shooing motion. Now get going. You don't want to be late for your shindig. Be safe tonight. Chelsea squeezed her shoulder and then stepped into her heels. Text me when you're in for the night so I know you're home. Honey, chances are I'm going to be late. If she played things right, she wouldn't be home at all. I know, but I worry about you. I'll text, I promise. Danielle slipped her ID and credit card into her super sweet utility belt and then picked up her bullwhip. It was a smaller version of the comic book characters, but she hadn't been able to find a full-length one in the amount of time she'd had. After taking one last moment to check to make sure she looked as fantastic as she felt, she headed for the door. Tonight, she was going to get her some hot male guy. She'd worry about the consequences later. Tonight would be the night he told her the truth. Grayson Harper shook his head, amused at his melodrama. He wasn't the type to leave anything to chance, and the same rule applied to Danielle, the sassy little thing he'd run into a few months ago. She'd made a sarcastic comment about him checking her out, which was exactly what he'd been doing, and he'd been intrigued despite himself, because she clearly hadn't known who he was. How she managed not to know surprised him, since he owned the damn building. But he couldn't turn down a chance to have coffee with her, to have a conversation with someone who didn't know him as Grayson Harper, CEO and all-around corporate hard-ass. Not that he minded most days. He'd built up his corporation from little more than nothing. Doing so hadn't left much time for friends or casual socializing, though he hadn't felt the loss until the last few years. Truth was, having coffee a few times a week with Danielle filled a need he had barely been aware existed. She treated him as if he was just a man and she was just a woman. When he was with her, his job and his very identity took a back seat to his personality. He couldn't remember the last time he'd met someone who hadn't recognized him instantly, and he hadn't felt the weight of it until he'd met her. Over the years, he'd stopped dating altogether because of the way women looked at him, as if he were a ladder into the life they wanted. When they saw him, they saw money signs and a position of power. While he didn't think Danielle was the type of woman to cling to a man for those reasons or any reason at all, he was almost afraid of the opposite reaction. Perhaps he should have told her the truth the second time they met in the coffee shop. But Grayson refused to run the risk of her changing how she felt because of who he was. He enjoyed her company far too much to sacrifice it. It didn't hurt that he wanted her with a desire that nearly swept away all his hard-won control. Every time she looked at him, her independence and don't-give-a-fuck attitude sparking in those dark eyes, it was everything he could do not to drag her into the nearest empty room and act out every single fantasy he'd had with her in it. The last month had made it even more difficult to maintain control. She'd begun touching him with purpose. It started innocently enough, her fingers brushing his when she passed the sugar, her ankle pressing against his calf, her shoulder rubbing his when she leaned against him to laugh at a shared joke. But recently there'd been no mistaking her intent. She'd meet his gaze as she traced circles on his wrist. Just this week, she'd spent their entire time together sitting as close to him as she could while being in a separate chair, her shoulder brushing his constantly and her perfume teasing him. But she'd turned him down every time he asked her out, claiming a variety of excuses. If she didn't keep showing up for coffee, he'd have thought she wasn't interested. Until now. Just this week, she'd made a loaded comment about how she hoped both their desires would be fulfilled this Halloween. There was no mistaking that. But even without sex in the picture, he wanted to spend more time with her, outside of the building's coffee shop. The problem was he couldn't do that without telling her exactly who he was. Oh, he could. But lies had the nasty tendency to breed and cause problems later down the road. He hadn't exactly lied. She'd seen the stack of mail in his hand that first day and automatically assumed he was the mail guy. But after a few conversations, he'd realized what her opinions on powerful men were, and he'd chosen to stay silent. Enough was enough, though, and tonight would be the night he came clean. The Halloween party was a charity event they put together every year, but this was the first time they'd put together a full-on masquerade ball. It'd also be the first year he attended. His secretary had been thrilled about the entire thing, and the office was buzzing with speculation about who would show up as what. He couldn't help wondering what Danielle would choose as her costume. After several months of stolen hours and conversations, he should have a good enough read on her to know. That he didn't delighted him to no end. She was a constant surprise, from what she'd say to what she'd do. A breath of fresh air in the stagnant swamp his life had become. He might be successful, but before he'd met her, he'd been so damn bored. Not anymore. Being around her was a growing addiction he didn't want to fight. To have all that fire and lightning of a personality in his arms and under his control in the bedroom was something that had started consuming him. Christ. He rubbed a hand over his face, pushing down the desire threading through him at the thought of her on her knees, looking at him in open defiance even as she submitted. He wanted that badly. Grayson adjusted the cloak about his shoulders and fixed the mask against his face. He'd always been a fan of the Phantom of the Opera, and lately he'd felt a keen familiarity with the man behind the mask. Everyone saw what they wanted to see. A terrifying creature bent on destruction. Not what he really was. A damaged man driven mad by loneliness. That one he could relate to. Not to mention he admired the Phantom for his willingness to do anything to get the girl. Grayson had plans to do exactly that. Chapter 2. Danielle passed her invitation to the guy at the door and strutted into the building. She'd always loved Halloween, loved the festive atmosphere and how nearly anyone could be convinced to have a good time once costumes were involved. There was also the aura of mystery around everything. You could be anything on Halloween. More than any other day of the year, it was rife with possibilities. That wasn't even bringing the candy into consideration. Speaking of, she made a beeline for the dessert table set up just far enough from the main doors so it didn't mess with people's ability to come and go as they pleased. There was every kind of sweet imaginable set up on tiered plates, cupcakes, chocolate-covered strawberries, and different types of candy. Danielle picked a strawberry and popped it into her mouth, nearly moaning with ecstasy. Oh, that was good. That was really good. That might be better than sex. At least the sex she'd had lately. She frowned. When was the last time? Oh my God, I don't even remember. That's how long it's been.
Enjoying yourself?
Danielle spun around and nearly choked. Grayson. He stood so close her dad would have whooped her ass for not noticing him approach. Taller than her by a good 6 inches even in her heels, he looked all sorts of menacing with his close-cropped hair and a black cloak making his broad shoulders appear even larger than they actually were. His brown eyes danced behind the white half-mask, lips drawn up in a small smile. The man made a damn good phantom. She swallowed hard, reminding herself of why she was here. Yes, he was sexy as all get out. And yes, she'd started to look forward to their coffee dates more than anything else about her week. But he was still just the male guy. This was nothing she couldn't handle. Hey there.
Hey there yourself.
With him standing so close, looking even better than the dessert table behind her, she was having a hard time focusing. Small talk. Small talk was safe. Once she had a few rum and cokes under her belt, she'd circle around to the real reason she was here. Danielle gave him her best wicked grin. What's a guy like you doing in a place like this? His gaze raked over her, making her glad her catsuit hid the fact that her nipples were perking right up.
I heard a certain thief was going to make an appearance. How could I pass up an opportunity to sweep her off her feet?
Oh, he was good. She'd give him that. It was part of the reason she kept coming around for their little coffee dates. Grayson had a way of keeping her on her toes while instantly putting her at ease. How he managed to do that was a mystery, but she wasn't in the mood to question it. Danielle laughed and poked his shoulder, his seriously well-muscled shoulder. With lines like that, it's no wonder you have to slum it around the office.
Danielle, you are anything but slumming it.
He moved closer and ran a finger down her arm.
I think I like you in leather.
She tried to cover up her shiver and went for bold. Look at me. How could you not like me in leather? She'd busted ass in aerobics class 4 times a week for the last few weeks to make sure she fit into this damn suit, so his blatant appreciation felt like a payoff.
I'd like you much better out of it.
Heat flashed through her, centering on a few key areas. Holy shit. He'd just thrown it all out there. She had every intention of seducing Grayson, and after their last talk, she'd figured he was on the same page, so this shouldn't be a surprise. Not when she already knew he had a refreshing way of cutting to the chase in any conversation. That said, even if she'd hoped the night would end with her legs behind her ears and screaming his name, she wasn't going to simply fold at his first pass. Hope springs eternal. She gave him a flirty smile and turned back to the dessert table. There was nothing on it that interested her as much as the man behind her, but she pretended to inspect the different kinds of cake. Gray reached around her to grab a strawberry, the move bringing his chest flush against her back. His breath ghosted over her ear.
You and I both know hope has nothing to do with it.
That was the damn truth. Maybe, maybe not. But she wasn't going to give this to him that easily. Even if they never talked again after tonight, Grayson wouldn't appreciate his time with her if she didn't make him work for it. Danielle tried not to think too hard on the ping in her chest at the thought of never talking to him again. So, what's a girl got to do to get a drink around here?
I know people who know people.
He offered his elbow, as regal as any bigwig.
I think I can meet that demand.
You know people who know people? She laughed as she slipped her hand into the crook of his arm and let him lead her through the groups gathered here and there. Some male guy you'd be if you didn't have all the connections. His mouth tightened, making her wonder if she'd made a mistake. But then Grayson turned those blazing eyes on her and she forgot her worry.
I have more connections than you could dream of.
Danielle laughed. Honey, I could say the same thing.
I'll just bet.
He motioned at the table in front of him.
As the lady commanded, the bar.
They'd set up an actual bar with a full rack of alcohol behind it. Things were definitely going to get interesting later on if even half the supply was consumed. She couldn't wait. There was nothing better than seeing people drop their professional masks and do things they wouldn't normally. If she didn't have her own plans for the night, she'd probably grab a bottle and post up in a corner to watch it all go down. Danielle leaned against the bar and winked at the bartender. He was way too skinny for her tastes, but she appreciated the balls he had to wear a green man suit. Spandex was not everyone's friend, and he pulled it off like a champ. Hey there, handsome. How about a rum and coke?
Sure thing, beautiful.
Grayson took up a spot next to her, his presence making him feel a whole lot closer than he actually was. It was a neat trick he'd pulled before, and it never failed to make her shift closer to him. She'd spent considerable time wondering what it'd be like to have all that focus centered on her in the bedroom, away from the prying eyes of the public. She didn't peg him for a selfish lover, not when he always held her chair for her, paid the bill despite her protests, and actually listened when she talked. But she didn't think he'd be a pushover either. No. Everything about Grayson screamed of a man with airtight control. What would it be like when he finally let that control slip its leash? The thought was both unnerving and thrilling. Generally, Danielle was the pursuer. She saw what she wanted, and she took it. If she got to thumb her nose at her father while doing it, so much the better. She couldn't remember the last time she'd let a man get the better of her. Hell, she couldn't remember the last time she'd wanted one to. With Grayson sitting beside her practically oozing dominance, she definitely wanted. Knowing that should send her running in the opposite direction. Hell, it should have made her back off months ago when she first realized that there was nothing safe about him, which was one of the reasons she'd turned down his attempts to get her on an actual date before now. She'd foolishly thought that planning on seducing him at the Halloween party would put the ball firmly in her court. If she was in control, she was less likely to be hurt. Obviously, it wasn't going to go down like that. Not when one look from him had her in danger of dropping her panties right there in the middle of the conference room.
What are you thinking?
If any other guy had asked her that, it would reek of insecurity. She would have laughed and patted his head and strutted off to find someone more entertaining. Gray asked the question like he already knew the answer. The sheer magnetism of his confidence drew her like a goddamn lodestone, just like it had from day one. It was everything she could do not to reach out and touch him. She clasped her hands around the glass. If you have to ask, you're not ready to know.
Fair enough.
He laughed, the sound rolling through her until it was everything she could do not to shiver.
How was your day?
At his question, she flashed back to the disappointed look on her father's face when they'd met for lunch, the memory threatening to pull her into a funk. But Grayson was waiting for her response, and there wasn't any point in dragging out her emotional bullshit right now. It ran the risk of ruining the mood of the entire night. Fine.
You know, usually when a woman says that particular word in that particular tone of voice, it means the exact opposite.
He shifted, his shoulder brushing hers.
You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, but if you do...
The man was too smart for his own good. Or hers. She took a healthy swig of her drink. I had a fight with my dad. Again. He was in town for a day before he hopped off to Japan or something, just long enough to express his disappointment over everything that is me.
I'm sorry.
Why? She shrugged, wishing she could do something about the tension riding through her shoulders. It's not like you're responsible for him screwing up my good mood this afternoon.
Maybe not, but I still don't like seeing you unhappy. And I know dealing with him upsets you.
That was Grayson, the guy who cared about what she thought or if she was having a good day, and who set her blood on fire and made her body ache. Her smile was a bit wider this time. You're in luck then, because I'm pretty damn happy right now.
Oh, yeah?
Yep. I have a drink in my hand, a smoking hot guy sitting next to me, and the night is full of possibilities. Before he could say something or dig deeper, she changed the subject. What about you? How was your day?
Tedious.
He turned around in his chair to face the rest of the room.
Honestly, the only thing that got me through today without losing my mind was knowing I'd see you at the end of it.
Even though she told herself not to blush, Danielle felt warmth climbing her neck. Enough of this borderline deep talk. They'd done that so often she felt like she knew Grayson nearly as well as she knew herself. Talking was not tonight's goal. Her savior came in the unexpected form of a middle-aged woman walking by. Are those feathers? For a second, she didn't think Grayson would let her change the subject, but then he shifted just enough to follow her gaze.
I do believe she's an angel.
Are you sure? She looked as if she'd taken a sheet and torn up a pillow to create the tiny wings that were currently leaving a trail behind her. As Danielle watched, another handful detached itself and drifted to the ground. The urge to sneeze was nearly overwhelming, even though she was pretty sure it was strictly mental. I thought maybe she was a Serta mattress. With a laugh, he slid closer and lowered his voice.
That one has nothing on Bob from accounting.
Her gaze landed on the shirtless man. He might not have the best body she'd ever seen, but he was hardly... Then he turned around, and her eyes nearly popped out of her head. Oh, dear God! What his guitar had hidden from view was the fact that he was wearing only a pair of tidy whities that had stopped being white a long time again. Danielle turned back to the bar and tried to control her laughter. We're going to hell.
Maybe.
Every time his shoulder brushed hers, it felt as if her entire body were contracting. Knowing what they were working toward, how the night would end, made her responses off the charts. It had been hard to keep from inviting him home for a little afternoon delight before, but now she didn't think she'd be able to make it as far as her apartment. She wanted him so desperately she could barely think straight. Stifling a shiver, she took a drink. Seriously, though, we're being mean.
Are we? Personally, I think Bob pulls off naked cowboy rather well.
Yeah, his potbelly really glows when it catches the light.
Now who's being mean? And look, Dolores agrees with me.
She glanced over her shoulder and shook her head. The angel had taken up a spot next to him and seemed to be hanging on his every word. Danielle was slightly impressed that Grayson seemed to know the names of people she'd never even seen, let alone met. Then again, as male guy, he'd have to, wouldn't he? Can you name every person in this room? Grayson shrugged.
Most of them.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?